Welcome everyone. You've made it to Design for Open Strategies and Processes. We're being presented from Jeff Kane today. He is an educational consultant for GBC Education Consulting. And I will turn the time right over to you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Dustin. Welcome everyone. Really excited to be back here at the Open Education Conference. As Dustin said, I'm an education consultant and I'm an instructional designer currently working on projects for the Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges here in the US. I'm also a former English and adult basic education teacher and a faculty mentor for UNESCO's Open Education for a Better World. Now, all of that, my little bit of resume comes back later when we're talking about definitions of instructional design. Before we move on, I'd like to, I'm based in University Place, Washington, near Tacoma. And here we learn, live, reflect, and teach on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people. As we are specifically situated on the traditional homeland of the Puyallup tribe Indians, we make intentional efforts to create inclusive and respectful partnerships that honor Indigenous cultures, histories, and identities. Let us continue to advocate for and partner with our Indigenous neighbors as we continue our lifelong work as a dynamic and inclusive community of educators, leaders, and learners. That was, that is my University Place picture there. What I'd also like you to do is, this is kind of a short, 25 minutes for me is kind of short. I thought we were going to do 90 minutes, not a complaint. So I'm going to stick closer to my notes than I normally would. But what's important about these sessions and about the Open Education Conference is that you take the time to make connections with one another. So in the chat, let us know who you are, what you do, and where you're from, and say hello to somebody. That's kind of my style of teaching and learning, is I usually have a very active, boisterous classroom. So feel free to not sit up straight and to not pay attention. You'll tune in where you can tune in, and you'll connect with people as you will. Let's see, we're also putting the questions in the chat. So if you have some questions, we'll go back through them and see what we can pick up. All right, so what was interesting about this, if you read the description of this session, it talked about that I was going to cover 3 areas, and it was processes, strategies, and resources in OER and instructional design. Now those 3 areas kind of overlap, but as I was talking to people about this, and as I was looking at some of, sort of dusting off some of my research on open pedagogy and instructional design, I realized that definitions are a shifting thing. They evolve. Definitions evolve as needs change and people gain understanding about what they're doing. So this became a 4-part presentation, which I'm really hoping doesn't slow us down too much. But let's start then with definitions. The presentation is about instructional design and connections with open, but as we'll see, that these all 3 of those terms that we were talking about, instruction, design, open, all have different meanings for different people. So just merely talking about instructional designers, we can't assume that we know who exactly we're talking about. So we'll start there. Instructional designers, if instructional designers can be a formal term. So somebody can have a degree in instructional design and be hired by a college as an instructional designer. But I think that what we've known is that instructional design comes from a lot of different places on a campus. So we have, learning resource specialists, librarians, education technologists, media developers, LMS managers, or people who are combinations of all of the above in some way or another. I was I've met librarians who were very innovative people, and as a matter of fact, a lot of the real, in my opinion, a lot of the real innovation in the last 10 years or so around open education and e-learning in particular, a lot of that innovation has come out of libraries. And the people who are libraries now are, some of them haven't sat at a reference desk in years. It's and then also the idea of a instructional designer, particularly being an educational technologist or an LMS managers. I was visiting San Francisco State University and talking to two instructional designers there, and they don't touch a computer. They do course design, and they go on to faculty offices, talk with faculty, and discuss how their courses work and how the tests work and things like this. So, and the idea that they'd get on a computer was just absurd to them. So instructional designer, if you are an instructional designer, what I'd like you to do is go into a chat and let us know if you serve that function, what department at your institution you work at. I'd be very interested in that. And if you're a librarian that does instructional design, or a accessibility specialist who does instructional design, I'm interested in that as well. Okay, this was I was looking at definitions of design, and one that I ran into by internet entrepreneur Kim Soko Schaefer was that design is the process of intentionally creating something while simultaneously considering its objective, its purpose, its function, the economics, sociocultural factors, and aesthetics. I like this because it's a fairly dense definition. Most dictionary definitions, when you talk about design, it talks about a plan. Now, having a plan is an important piece to instructional design. But this definition, that previous definition, was very different from the typical definition of getting course materials to meet course objectives. There are a lot of schools of thoughts on how people learn and how we should therefore teach. And I try to encourage new instructional designers to familiarize themselves with a wide variety of learning theories, because you never know what might be happening in a department, an institution, or with individual instructors. Pedagogy can be a lot like grammar rules. You show me how you punctuate a paper, and I bet you I can tell you what year you graduated from high school, for instance. And every few years, somebody makes a really great list of current learning theories. And at the end of this presentation, I have a link to a concept map of learning theories that someone has built that I've used with new instructional designers. And the idea is that if you have somebody who has a concept about what teaching and learning is that might be different from yours, having an understanding of that, of those concepts, allows you to more easily work with that person and find some shared goals together. Then the other other question is what is open? Let me move some of these windows here. So open, in open education practices, I'm talking about accessibility, equity, student-centered and driven, and ethical. And ethical, unfortunately, I think is a not talked about too much, maybe sometimes around in FERPA, but also, my concern is, for instance, the management of student data. And I believe that OEP, this open education practices or open education pedagogy, needs to be able to enable Rajiv Jangiani's 5 R's, respect, reciprocity, risk, reach, and resistance. I have a link to this definition there in the references section of this presentation. I use open in a very broad sense to include access, facilitation, and engagement. There are openly licensed things in the world which are also important in facilitating openness. But for me, that's kind of an ancillary piece to it. It's a side, it's included in it. In the Venn diagram of openness, there are open education resources, but it's certainly only part of the picture. Let's see here. So a good operating definition for open for me has been through my work with UNESCO, teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium, digital otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no-cost access, use, adaptation, and redistribution by others with no or limited restrictions. I like this definition because it broadly includes material in the public domain, which is vastly expanding due to the nature of copyright. If you're new to OER, I would encourage you to follow the work of the Creative Commons, of course, to understand licensing and how to find openly licensed materials. This should be in the toolkit of every instructional designer or faculty member, librarian, or administrator. Some of the ideas here that, for instance, with open tools, things like H5P, for instance, I noticed that there are a lot of sessions on these kinds of tools here. So I'm not going to cover too much of that, but I do have, again, links to that kind of material in the links to that kind of material in my references and tools section. So one of the things that that I think you'll find, I think you could go to a dozen presentations at a conference like this and find 14 definitions of open. There are other definitions of OER, but tools alone should not define what we do. That's the mistake with things of LMSs or confusing textbooks as courses. I'm not a fan of frameworks that merely describe OER by what they supposedly afford or allow us to do. And it's like we're coming full circle and having a textbook define a course again, instead of thinking about, instead of the course defining the text, or better yet, having the course create the text. It encourages thinking about education in transactional terms when we're focused so much on this thingness that I can't use, like a faculty member might say, I can't use an open psychology book because Kane's Review of Psychology is the standard textbook. One of the affordances of focusing on textbook is that we begin to equate them with the course, and we run the risk of reducing education into commodities and transactions. Then I was, again, with the textbooks, is I've often seen if the faculty members don't move towards open, often the students will bypass the faculty members' curriculum and find openly licensed resources anyway. So that is our set of definitions. One of the things that definitions allow us to do is they allow us to have kind of a shared conversation about this. And so I totally respect that that there are people with different kinds of definitions around open because they have different purposes. And so if you have other definitions that you like, please include them in the chat and we'll get that conversation going too. I'm just going to take a quick poke through. We're not going to get to everything, I'm sure, in this short amount of time. Paul Blackman, for instance, used to be a curriculum development officer and now runs e-learning at the his institution. Dan is with K through 12 mostly, feeling a bit lonely at this conference. Email me because we've got some crazy things happening in the state of Washington around openness and textbooks, and state of California is the same. And Richard says that he works in ID in the Office of Academic Technology. And it's interesting when you run into instructional designers who are siloed in the library, instructional designers who are siloed in IT, and then maybe in the e-learning department. And I feel like it's our goal as instructional designers to kind of get all of those people in the same room, because there's a lot of rebuilding or redesigning the wheel, you know. Okay. Now, with all of that said, counterintuitively, I advocate for the use of openly licensed course templates, course design rubrics, and OER adoption rubrics. And that's always kind of a shock to people, but I don't use them as the tablets handed down on Mount Sinai. I use them as a jumping off point. We currently have a system that is built around designing courses based on course objectives. Every course design template includes alignment with course objectives as the primary purpose of the course. I know that this is the culture I'm working in. This is what people have been doing since I think 1986, according to my accounting. My question becomes, as an instructional designer, is how can I get the faculty to see past that, or administrators to see past that? We can include alignment to objectives, but we can do so much more. This also it's important to inform your work as an instructional designer with current thinking and learning theory, because educators and administrators like to see there's a plan. Imagine if you were asked to build a plane and you told your client, let's noodle around with plainness and then we'll see what flies. We're gonna build this plane from the heart. Well, they won't be too happy, because experimentation is important, especially now in a time of COVID. But folks are comforted with some foundational blueprint that lets them know that you're really thinking about how things actually fly. I only wish that the science of teaching and learning were more developed, because flight really only allows you to do a couple of things to have the plane go up and down. But teaching and learning, I feel that cognitive sciences and all like this, that what we're doing is, we're trying to look at ourselves through a microscope in a mirror, and there's very little agreement about how that works right now. But so that's part of my processes is course templates, course design rubrics. I use a lot of this is I mean, I prefer to use openly licensed materials because that's the only way that we can really legally adapt, revise, and reuse. So with course templates, one of the things that is important about that is to adapt these templates to the community in which they are located. So this is a piece of instructional design that can often get left out, that you cannot find out how a course template needs to be adapted to a community if you don't know that community. So being able to talk to people, being able to communicate is very important, and asking questions about what's working in the community and what's not. An example of that would be some of the work I did at College of Redwoods. The math department there was having a lot of problems with students coming out of the high schools. And so we started talking to them about why that might be. And it turns out that Humboldt County, California is a very economically depressed place, and it's hard to keep teachers, and it's hard to get enough teachers to do the difficult work of getting the students up to speed in math. And it wasn't until that we actually went out into the community, started talking to people, and then came back and started coming up with some solutions that that things were able to change. So using course templates to define particular problems in student learning and it can connect with open education practices with current learning goals. So in other words, when as an instructional designer, you're coming in with some boilerplate, you're using it as a communication tool, finding out where the problems are, and then turning to the open community to find solutions to those problems. Wow, 25 minutes goes by fast. So course design rubrics, we use these as well. I have not been a big fan of them because they typically to be tied down with copyrights and things like that. So they're not adaptable, but fortunately there's a lot of course design rubrics out there that are openly licensed and are centering on diversity, equity, and inclusivity concerns. And again, it's a tool for teaching student engagement. It's the same with OER adoption rubrics. I have some links to these in my in the references and tools section of this presentation. I'm going to skip. Excuse me as I go through my notes here. Let's see. So some of the hurdles of getting faculty off of commercial ideas, textbooks, is the idea that so-and-so's textbook is the standard. But some materials, such as videos and other materials, can be brought in from the open community, and mapping the outcomes of the course with open education resources and open pedagogy assignments. So then with the strategies, open instructional design is accessible. Practices universal design for learning, and removes economic barriers. So the goal of each one of the strategies I employ as an instructional designer is to increase access. In some institutions, accessibility is often siloed away in its own department, or as an ancillary to a tech department. It needs to be made the responsibility for everyone. And I have some links to universal design for learning that I also use with faculty. Open instructional design is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. We have rubrics for reviewing OER and curricula and courses for DEI issues, and those are also openly licensed that we use.
Jeff, I'm coming in with the hook in 20 seconds.
Okay. All right. So I did not complete strategies. And the what I will do is in my 20 seconds is I will make sure that you have the links to the references and tools. Probably the quickest way at this point to get to them is on my blog at jeffkane.com. I have this presentation. I have the references, the tools, the description of the session. I also have, if you drill back to the Google Slides, I have my notes in there. And so once again, I hope that the connections that you've made with people here are the most important thing. And I look forward to talking to anyone who is interested in instructional design and open practices to please contact me.
Everyone grab a screenshot. This is great information, and Jeff will not be angry if any of you reach out to him through any of these various methods. So thank you so much, Jeff. That was a great presentation. Thank you everyone who is here. Please grab this information and reach out to Jeff in the near future. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you, everyone.